Hey, are you ready to grow your business? You have checked out the number one resource for business leaders, entrepreneurs, startup founders, and managers. And we're going to teach you how to grow and scale your business with real actionable steps. There's no fluff in this podcast. It's just good advice. Check out this episode. If you're a first-time listener, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. And if you enjoy this episode, leave us a 5-star review. Today's episode is with Henry Daas, who's a serial entrepreneur, and he's someone who understands what it really takes to grow a business. He's also the author of FQ, Financial Intelligence, which is available on Amazon. You got to check out your copy. I'll put a link down in the episode description below. And today we have a chat about what does it really mean to grow a business? How do you actually take an idea and turn it into something meaningful? And more importantly, what are all the important financial decisions you need to know about as you actually take your business and grow it? Check out this episode. You're going to enjoy it. Here comes your good advice. Hey, thanks for checking out another episode of the Good Advice Podcast, bringing you another great guest today. I'm sitting down with Henry Daas today. I got to tell you about him. He's a serial entrepreneur. We were joking about the difference between a wantrepreneur and then someone who's actually gotten out and done it. Henry is that person. He started a business. He's made it happen. He's now a business coach. He's been a screenwriter, investor. He's also gotta love this, a loving husband and a father. We were just talking about his kids. And he's actually someone you can even talk to about something as fun as baseball cards. But talking about his business, his consulting business, Daas Knowledge, he helps provide professional coaching for entrepreneurs and business owners for companies that have sales under $10 million. He also has a debut book, FQ, Financial Intelligence, which is the culmination of his 6 decades of financial knowledge and experience. Henry, thank you for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm excited. I feel like it's funny because we have all this small talk. I feel like we've already hit it off, and our audience didn't get to catch any of that. But I can already tell this.
You got to press record earlier. That's what you have to do. As soon as the guy gets on, press record.
Yeah.
Edit later.
Just bomb him with it. Yeah. Well, I can already tell it's going to be a great episode. I'm excited to really dig in. There's so much that I want us to be able to talk about today. First of all, I want to know. Let me just welcome you, and I want to know how you're doing today.
I'm doing great. Yeah, I'm busy. As we talked about, I'm moving. So it's a bit of a 3-ring circus here, trying to get stuff packed up and coordinate everything and do all the other stuff that I have to do to keep the lights on. So it's a bit of a challenge, but it's fun.
And you're making it through I feel like I feel like every episode I'm like, hey, yeah, there's still a pandemic. It feels like it's like beating a dead horse. It's like it's still a thing, but so you're making it through the pandemic.
It is a thing. My oldest son, Matt, had COVID in August. So Saturday night, he went into the city, New York City, to hang out with a bunch of his friends and watch the Conor McGregor fight. And he didn't want to do it. And we encouraged him to. It's like, dude, you got to live your life. So, of course, he comes home. And yesterday he finds out that somebody there tested positive for COVID. And I'm like,
my gosh.
You already had COVID. I don't know if you can reinfect. He's a nervous Nelly. So he's going to get an antibody because he doesn't want his 59-year-old mother and 61-year-old father to get COVID. And I get that. Their kids have been very respectful, really trying to maintain best practices, but you've got to balance that between, and I want to be cavalier because hundreds of thousands of people have died and been sick, but you do have to still kind of live your life because you're never going to get this time back.
Right. Well, it's definitely a really strange time, and it's, I think, navigating that balance between common respect for your fellow man, right, and not also being like locked in your closet.
I know people who have not left their buildings in New York City since March. I mean, literally locked down, having everything delivered and doing all the hands-free. There is an intermediate there somewhere. And, I'm a type 2 diabetic, so I'm in that high-risk group. But I still we'll go to the Home Depot or go to Costco. I keep my distance. I wear my mask. I don't do stupid stuff. And
it's so simple, and yet we make it so challenging. Now you mentioned you went over to Costco. I'm a big fan of Costco. We don't actually have Costco where I come from.
Really?
I'm living in Walmart world. I'm up in Northwest Arkansas where it's headquartered, and all the love in the world for Walmart. But I do wonder what would life be like with a Costco in our state.
I don't know. I was visiting. Yeah. We were visiting some friends over the weekend who live in the Hudson Valley. They're like us. They're like super COVID conscious, and they had somebody in the house. But the four of us have now. That is the sum total of our social scene. It's just one other couple, and we feel safe going there. And they said a Taco Bell opened up in their neighborhood, and it was a big deal. It was like a big event.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, throw a parade. Why not?
I feel like I don't have I was just talking to someone the other day. I was like, man, I really enjoy, because we were talking about like what's like your cheat meal, like how do you veg out? And I was like, I got to get like a cheesy gordita crunch from Taco Bell. And then he was like, we were talking back and forth about it, and I was like, but I always have like a big stomach ache. And he was like, oh, well, you need the Taco Bell Iron Gut. And I was like, well, what is that? And he was like, oh, it's like, you build up your resistance to, the quality, I guess the poor quality of the food.
I have never eaten at a Taco Bell.
Never?
I can say that I have never in my entire life.
Okay. So do you have a fast food that you do go to, or are you no fast food at all?
If I have to go to any of them, I probably would go to Wendy's.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, they seem to be kind of the pick of the litter. I have been to McDonald's many times, of course, right? Especially having kids and bringing them up and Happy Meals. They do an incredible job of marketing that stuff.
Now I have a 10-month-old. Is this is this the ultimate life hack, is to know where the nearest McDonald's is?
Yeah, it's, what, we didn't go to McDonald's when I was a kid because we went there once with my dad. Again, we're talking the 1960s when McDonald's was still relatively new, and he got all the way back home and they messed up the meal, and he said, we're never going to McDonald's. And we never did. He was a KFC man, and was till the day he died.
He held on to that grudge until
my dad was known to hold. I've been known to hold.
Oh my gosh,
grudges as well. But yes, he held on to that grudge.
Oh, Henry, this is too funny. Well, hey, I read your bio. Obviously, I introduced you on the podcast. Man, I want to hear your perspective. Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do for a living, especially what you're doing nowadays. You have such an incredible history in terms of everything you have done. Give us your perspective, your take on it.
So I started my first business 30 years ago, 1991. Before that, I was working for the New York Stock Exchange as a programmer, living in New York City, living in Lower Manhattan. But I always knew I wanted to run my own business. I come from a family of professional people, entrepreneurs, doctors, lawyers, dentists. It was just kind of in the DNA. And you have a tendency to model what it is that you see. And so that was, I figured it was in my future. It wasn't until I turned 30. I started it as a side hustle, right? Talk about being a entrepreneur. But it was an opportunistic business. I look at the origin story of businesses untold two ways. There's the opportunistic, or otherwise known as the accidental business. And then there is the purposeful business, where someone actually sits down and writes a business plan and does all that stuff. And goes through all of that. Neither is better than the other. I've done both. The only purposeful business I really did was my coaching business 10 years ago. Before that, it was all kind of accidental. A guy said he needed something, a friend of a friend. I said, yeah, I can do that. I did it. I made some money. And I said, yeah, there's really a business here.
So what were you doing in this first business?
So one of my college friends was a salesman for a leasing company, and he was complaining to me about how he couldn't get a bunch of Macs for one of his Fortune 500 companies. I think it was Time Magazine or Sports Illustrated, somebody under the under the time heading. And back then in the early, in the 80s and the 90s, it was all about PCs, right? The only place that Macintosh computers lived were the corporate backwaters of the graphic arts department. So I said, let me see if I could do it. And I went out and I actually bought the stuff retail and I reconfigured it. You're talking about, for those of us who want to go through the real archives, they were Mac 2 SIs and they had 30 megabyte drives and 3 megabytes of RAM.
Wow.
And they needed like 50 megabyte drives and 8 megabytes of RAM. I'm talking mega, not gigs or terabytes.
Right.
So, and these things cost thousands of bucks back then. So I went and I bought them retail from a gray marketeer, and then I bought a bunch of drives and a bunch of memory and I upgraded them myself. And I made a couple bucks on it. And then he kept feeding me deals. And before you know it, I had a business.
So how did you have the cash to like put up for all these Macs, or did you just have a nest egg that you were able to
called credit cards. I met a guy who funded his entire business. I was at a compact computer, another thing from way back in the Wayback Machine. He did about $500,000 or $600,000 in business, and he did it all on credit cards. He said, I have 30 credit cards. I have a whole system that I manage it with an Excel spreadsheet, and that's how he ran the business.
Oh my gosh. On paper, this is like probably like one of the biggest sins of like cash flow management. And yet, and hey, you made it happen. This guy sounds like he made it happen,
desperate measures. Eventually, that guy who was feeding me deals became my business partner. And then I said, we need a credit line. So we went to Ingram Micro, who was, still is one of the biggest distributors of electronics products in the world. And his dad said, I'll give you a $25,000 letter of credit that you could park at Ingram Micro. And we did. And they gave us $25,000 worth of credit, dollar for dollar. So if we failed to pay, they pulled the LFC. And that eventually grew up to a couple $100,000.
Wow.
He backed us. He parked some T-bills and backed us. We never got a penny of leverage. I think we were at $200,000 of credit line, and that was it. No leverage for you. And then eventually we got a $500,000, what's called a flooring line, just on our own good looks. That was a big day. That took about 5 years to get to that point. Yeah, you need credit.
Maybe this is a good, we can even pause the story a little bit. Maybe this is a good point to segue and ask you about your book, FQ, Financial Intelligence.
Sure.
And I don't know if this was intentional. Obviously, EQ is really popular in the corporate world, in the training world of emotional intelligence.
It was very intentional.
Okay.
IQ, EQ, FQ.
Well, so you're talking about FQ, Financial Intelligence. I want to know a little bit more about this book that you came out with.
So I was at a conference a couple of years ago in Bangkok for this group. I'm actually wearing their T-shirt, Dynamite Circle. It's all digital nomads. So BKK is Bangkok. So I'm at the DC BKK 2018. I don't know. It's a couple of years ago. Sitting around a table with a whole bunch of coaches. We're talking about scalability because I coach one-on-one. And I mentioned that, my Jim Collins BHAG, my big, hairy, audacious goal was to write a course in financial intelligence, not financial literacy. Literacy is the ability to read and write. No, I want it to be an intelligence. Take all those skills and actually do something with it. And they all kind of looked at me and said, well, dude, you're not getting any younger. You might want to get on that. So I came back home and I sat down and I wrote this course in like 2 months. And then I tested it with about a dozen people and everything was great. And then somebody said, you know what? You should turn it into a book. Book will be your lead magnet. I'm like, I should have thought of that. And then I went down the rabbit hole of creating a book because I really wanted it to be done right. So I had 250 infographics in my book. Well, I just scraped them off the internet. And now it's like, I got to go get permission. This is going to be printed on like real paper and distributed on Amazon and actual places. I'm not going to take somebody else's intellectual property. That took a long time. I actually did that myself, which was a lot of work. And I hired a copy editor. What's a copy editor? I hired a guy to lay it out in InDesign. I'm not going to use Microsoft. I wrote the whole thing in Scrivener. It's like, I can't publish a book at a Scrivener. I mean, it's a good program, but I can't publish a book that's going to be on a bookshelf. So it was a big, big, big undertaking. So, so now the book is out in the world. I sell the course. So it's a 20-week course. I will teach you everything in the book, chapter by chapter, week by week. It's very methodical. It's pretty much everything I think you need to know from a personal finance standpoint, from your first savings bond to your last will and testament.
Now, is this financial? Is there a link to running your business and making solid business decisions financially as well?
There is, but it's really meant more for people for their personal finances. Although obviously there are things that overlap.
Yeah.
Right, a balance sheet, an income statement, a statement of cash flows, all of those things. There's just certain things that go on in a business context, like capitalizing versus capitalization versus expenses and depreciation and all of these various business tax machinations that you just don't do in the personal world. But the concept is still the same, right? Your company needs to have a strong balance sheet. You need to have a strong P&L. Balance sheet might be for a person a statement of net worth, right? So, but it's the same thing. What are my assets? What are my liabilities? But more importantly, what are my contingent liabilities? My second chapter is called The Thick Green Line, where I map people's age versus their net worth. So astonishingly, a lot of people will get to be the age of 30 and their net worth is zero. I know because when my wife and I got married, I was 31. We had a net worth of zero. We just did. People come out, they got massive student debt.
Yeah.
So even though they might have a good job, they're going to turn around at 30 years old. And if they sat down and figured it out, they're going to realize that their balance sheet is zero.
So how does that happen? How is that so prolific? I mean, are we just so uneducated that we just don't?
Yeah, yes, what you said. Right? We are. They'll teach you. I was an electrical engineer in college. I must have taken probably 4 or 5 years of calculus or calculus related stuff. When have I used calculus in my adult life at 61 years old? Right? I've actually used algebra, but I can't say that I've ever really used logarithms, right? Once, I think, in all of my life did I ever have to deal with that.
Do you remember, like, in calculus, I don't remember what it was, but it was like, I'm not even be able to describe the example because it's so like foreign in my mind, but it's like this circle and it's like using calculus to know the difference between like, I guess, translating the angle of the circle to like the actual line. And we spent like weeks learning this concept and like memorizing the circle. I mean, literally like weeks. Like it was, I remember we even had a test that like the whole test was this circle. And we couldn't have spent any more time on it. It was crazy. And in hindsight, I have never beyond that test used that concept ever.
It's like a train leaves New York at 80 miles an hour. And then another one leaves Cleveland heading east at 40 miles an hour. Where do they meet? It's like, I don't care. I'm going to catch the next one.
Exactly. Well, and it's interesting because I've actually been a teacher. I was a high school teacher in Houston, Texas. And man, it's such an interesting gap in terms of how we educate and prepare people for the real world. But even from like a business standpoint, there's not a lot of conversation on even what that looks like to start a business or to even run a business. And I was talking to somebody the other day. This was actually a couple of years ago. I was talking to somebody and I was joking about someone else I'd been talking to who had no idea what a P&L was, a business owner who didn't know what a P&L was. And so I was telling this person, I said something like, man, it was just so crazy to me. This person didn't even know what a P&L was. And he goes, well, I don't know what a P&L is. And I was like, you're $1 million plus business owner. How does that? And the guy I was talking to was kind of just accidentally succeeding his way forward. He ran a print shop and people showed up and they wanted stuff printed and he put it in the bank account and there just always was enough. I mean, he just, God bless him. And that it just worked, and so.
As I've said a zillion times, including on many a podcast, success is a great deodorant. Right? it just is. So part of writing this book and creating this course is to sort of demystify that, take a methodical step-by-step approach. Try to keep it entertaining. I mean, I call it a money memoir because I tell a lot of anecdotal stories, so that it's not just dry nonsense. Because I've read a lot of these books and they're boring. It's tough to get people engaged in it, even though they're going to deal with money every single day from pretty much the day they're born until the day they die.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Would be nice to have at least a little bit of acumen, even if you're going to outsource it to somebody else. Because I talk about it in the book. I talk a lot about stocks and bonds and investing and IRAs and all of those things. Even if it bores you to tears and you want to outsource it, you still kind of need to know. Because otherwise, you're at risk that somebody else is going to take all of your hard-earned money and abscond with it, one way or the other. Either maliciously or just by ignorance or stupidity.
There's a lot to understand that we don't understand. We, as in just the general people, that we don't understand about money. But there's other parts of it. I don't know if you ever saw that old SNL skit with Steve Martin, and it's on like credit card debt or something. And this person comes in, they're like, "Hey, I'm here to help you with your credit card debt." And it's he and his wife. And he's like, "Oh, that's really great." And he goes, "Okay, so here's what you need to do. You don't want to spend more than you have." And it's this really great bit where Steve Martin's like, "Wait, what? Like, what do you mean I can't?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's so simple. Just don't spend what you don't have." And he's like, "Okay, well, let's say that I want to buy a TV, but I don't have the money. Can I still buy it?" And he's like, "No, you can't." So there's this other piece of it that is really simple. That's like, okay, I'm not like a genius with money, but I at least know some basic things. It almost feels like part of the mystery around finances is like this other piece of like personal diligence, personal patience, I guess. It's like I probably shouldn't buy that, but man, I really want to buy that. I probably don't need that, but I want it. So like, do you address that? Like those personal habits in the book?
The very first chapter is called The Psychology of Money. And there are two goalposts. There's scarcity and there's abundance. I know the people that I interact with almost by and large live in scarcity, right? They want to protect what it is that they have. They're not as concerned with the money that they haven't made yet or are going to make sometime in the future. It's more about protecting what it is that they have. So that leaves them, in many cases, too risk averse. They're really never going to be able to achieve sustainable wealth because they're just a little too scared, right? They're living in scarcity. On the other side is people who live a little too much in abundance, right? The riverboat gambler, the guy who's out there just basically saying, "I don't care. I'm gonna live my life because if I'm lucky, I got 80 years on the planet. I'll let my executor worry about paying all my debts when I'm dead." You can make an argument in both directions, but again, you want to achieve some level of balance, right? You want to find that sort of sweet spot that says, I don't want to deprive myself because life is short. And I got to do things, just like I said, if you want to go hang out with your friends and watch the McGregor fight, well, I guess there will be another one because there's always a rematch. But you know what? These are life opportunities. I have an opportunity to be social with people, but you don't want to take stupid risks.
Right.
You don't want to go to a club that's crowded with hundreds of people not wearing masks to watch the Conor McGregor fight. But if you're going with a half a dozen guys in an apartment, and you stay reasonably spaced, you should be okay.
But doesn't it seem like some of these things, like objectively, we're like, okay, that's a bad decision. You shouldn't do that. But it feels like sometimes when you're in it, it's like, oh yeah, that's the right decision. And I think about entrepreneurs who maybe they've just started their business. I just talked to someone the other day. They were like, okay, we have a van, we're going to buy another van, and we're going to also put money aside. We're going to be buying a second location for the business as well. And I said, okay, well, hang on, you don't even have a customer first. You don't even have one customer yet. And so while I appreciate the long-term thinking you have, you don't want to start spending. you want to first make sure that you actually have some legs to this business. And I get these conversations a lot where someone's like, well, no, I have to, it's the whole, like, I have to spend money to make money. And I'm like, yeah, but, and it's like this objective versus subjective where like you're in it and it's like, oh, I got to have that. I got to spend money on that. I need that for my business. Any advice on how someone can make like the right decision on this? This is how you decide the difference between long-term buying and short-term. I need this. How does someone do that really well?
All right. So there's a whole bunch to unpack there. It reminded me a little bit of the late 90s during the whole .bomb era. So my office was Broadway and 19th Street, 900 Broadway, which was, renamed Silicon Alley because there were all these little companies popping up. And there was this whole idea of optics. We have to show the world. So they're out there buying, $1,000 Herman Miller Aeron chairs for everybody in the company. They're building these gorgeous, beautiful offices. And the rationalization was, we're competing against people who are doing the same thing. We can't look like some schlub. Right. There's a book called One Up on Wall Street. I refer to it in my book a number of times. It was Peter Lynch, who ran the Fidelity Magellan Fund for 20 years, most successful mutual fund manager in the history of mankind. And he would go visit companies and he would say, if I saw, old desks and used furniture, that was a good thing. That meant that they had their priorities straight because this is not something that the world was going to see. But there's a balance there because the rationalization was, well, I'm not going to attract the right talent if I have some schlubby office space. I don't know if that's true or if that's a cognitive distortion. What I do know is the Herman Miller Aeron chair that I own, I bought for a couple $100 from a company that had gone out of business after the .bomb. So there's nothing wrong with buying other people's folly and other people's mistakes.
Yeah. And maybe that's a great insight in and of itself is, if you are going to buy that next van, buy the beat up one that you can fix up for cheap rather than, you're on the car lot on the new, I don't know what, I've never bought a van before.
I bought a van for one of my guys and it had 100,000 miles on it. It was 10 grand, when I had my home theater business. It's like, it was in really good shape. He was very mechanical. He said, don't worry, I can maintain it. I'll take care of changing oil and all that stuff. And you could just run it forever. It's like, I alternate between buying new cars and buying used cars. But I just bought a brand new car. Since I bought a new house, I bought a new car to go with it. And I'll drive that till the fenders fall off. Right? Yeah. The best thing that I can afford, and I will drive it until it can't drive anymore. I don't have to lease something and have it every 3 years because I want something new. I don't care that much about it. It's a car. It gets me from point A to point B.
Talk to me a little bit about not even so much like the actual like in business decision making that we're just now talking about, but also like for people listening who are thinking, man, I want to start my business. I don't necessarily have the startup cash to do it. In fact, you see a lot of people in the business world or in the entrepreneurship world who will, they'll quit their job, they'll jump in. Okay, I'm starting my business, and then they realize, well, crap, I need to go get a sale. I need to make this happen because I'm broke. Any advice for that early startup phase of how do you get cash or how do you position yourself to have cash? Not to in a way that avoids being, sort of like the Donald Trump, I got a small loan of $1 million from my dad,
or $500 million.
So what other useful strategies can we use if we want to go start a business to actually have that cash ready, so that we're not positioned poorly for it?
Okay, so I have another one of my many sayings. If you're going to let money get in the way of running your business, it will.
Interesting.
Right. There's no way around that. Like I said, I started that first company. I ran it off of credit cards. Pretty expensive way if you don't have the money. Somebody doesn't pay you within the 30-day time period. And that happens all the time when you're starting up, because you want to make sales and you'll give people generous terms. You might get hit with 20% interest. You got to sit down and calculate whether you're actually making money at what it is that you're doing. One of the big mistakes that I see, and I've seen it happen with clients of mine, people will want to bring on a partner or somebody key to get off the ground, and they'll give them equity. Right? Oh, I'm going to give you equity, or I'm going to pay you less. I'm going to make you a partner, blah, blah, blah. Equity is very expensive. My feeling is that you should not offer equity to anyone until you have exhausted the debt markets. The world is awash with money, right? I mean, it just is. There are trillions of dollars out there available for people. You just got to go out and get it. And you have to understand that you're at risk. I had this on my mastermind. I run a investment mastermind group yesterday. And people are like, I don't want to personally guarantee. It's like, that's part of the deal. You're on the hook for it. And if things go south, you pay it back. And if you can't pay it back, you declare bankruptcy and you get back on the horse and you keep going. So if you let all of those thoughts, oh my God, I've got to raise all of this money and this, that, and the other thing. If you let the thought of that stop you, it absolutely will. You'll never get out of the gate. That's why we call them entrepreneurs. They want the security of the paycheck, right? Without the risk, even though I think working for someone else is actually riskier than working for yourself. But that's, a 30-year entrepreneur talking. You have to decide, can I tolerate this, right? Am I going to be able to sleep at night knowing that I just borrowed $100,000 by hook or crook to run my business? And if it doesn't work out, I'm broke and I got to pay it back. That'll wake you up in a cold sweat. Right?
Well, I'm curious, just like listening to you, what was it like with your family as you were, sort of growing your entrepreneurial acumen? Because it feels like there's this other piece of it of, I'm gonna maybe take out a loan, or I'm gonna take on some risk for starting my business. And there's this other piece of the sense of stability that your spouse either appreciates or doesn't appreciate. And, if you have kids, whatever that family unit looks like, any advice for people who, is it mandatory that you have to have a spouse who's like, yeah, go get them? Or because it feels like there's a little bit of tension there.
I don't know if it's mandatory, but it sure helps. I walked in one day and I said to my wife, after 18 months of running this as a side hustle, I'd done over $500,000 worth of business. And I said, I'm going to quit my $60,000 a year Wall Street job as a programmer with my platinum plated benefits. We had the New York Stock Exchange had the best benefits imaginable. And I'm going to hang up a shingle and start this business. Right. And now she's an entrepreneur as well. She wasn't at the time, although she had a side hustle. So if you can imagine two people working day jobs, she worked on 7th Avenue in the schmata business, in the clothing business, and had started a little kids line. I'm having computers delivered to this tiny little apartment on Park Avenue South, and we've got a baby. It was a 3-ring circus. Mm-hmm. So to some degree, it was like maybe we were just too dumb to know any better. I don't know. Or maybe it was just that we were so confident. I hate to say overconfident, but maybe even slightly overconfident in our own abilities to make this work, that we were willing to take the risk.
Well, I have God bless my wife. She's been so supportive since day one. But I have another friend of mine who was in the early startup phase of his business, and after several months, it just wasn't profitable. It wasn't like your story. He hadn't flipped $500,000. He was just going deeper into debt. Mm-hmm. And in talking with me, he was like, "Man, it's really challenging because my wife is like, it's kind of like." Not in like sort of the stereotypical rude way, but just like, hey, get a job. Like, this is, what are we doing? Like, this is really not seeming to work. Yeah. And he was kind of like, man, I don't know what to do. Like, do I keep going on pushing on my dream, or do I need to give up and go get a 9-to-5 again? And I didn't know the answer. I just was kind of like, man, that's really hard. I have no idea.
It's tough. It is.
And I don't know how someone navigates that. I mean, I don't know what that even looks like, or even what a timeline looks like for starting a business. So
expect some drama. Let's just put it that way. I mean, as supportive as my wife was, and she had a very good job, and even though when we got married, we didn't really have a proverbial pot to piss in. Within probably 5 or 6 years, we had a net worth of 7 figures, and I've never not had a net worth of 7 figures. So, we were kicking ass. But that first year that I gave up the $60,000 a year job, that very first year that we were in business, I made $12,000. I made $1,000 a month, right? I mean, living in Manhattan, in Greenwich Village, New York City, I mean, that's like, it barely pays your coffee bills. But that's because we were taking all of that money and throwing it back into the business, right? That's what we had to do, right?
And did you just have, was it just such a deep belief in what you were doing? Like, you were just like, this is going to work. Like, I know what I'm doing. Like, I'm going to make this grow, or...
It part of it is just the arrogant belief that you cannot fail. Right.
Yeah,
I think
better or worse,
to a large
right?
degree, you kind of have to have that almost lunatic idea that failure is not an option. Failure is very much an option. I know I've had businesses that have failed. So I know that. I've spawned a whole bunch of different businesses. And they can and will fail.
Now, when you were first starting, what was sales like for you? Was it hard? Was it easy? Was it something you felt really comfortable in? Or?
My partner did the sales. So we determined from the very beginning that I was Mr. Inside and he was Mr. Outside. That's the way we described it. We didn't have a buy-sell agreement, which I don't recommend, right? Because 10 years later, when the business kind of fell apart, and I wanted to get out of my relationship with him, that was actually the impetus to my hiring my first business coach. Was to figure out a way to get out of what had become a toxic partnership.
Which is,
and I blame him.
It's a lot more common than I think people realize. And it almost feels like when I was just talking to my sister-in-law who's starting a business with her boyfriend, and I was kind of like, you might want to have like an operating agreement. And it was like, no, like
sage advice, sage.
It always starts with somebody who you're like, we're buddies, we're in love. It's great. There's never going to be an issue. And it feels like this is so common that eventually it spoils a little bit.
It's just like romantic relationships.
Oh,
I mean, it just is. There's something to be said for a prenup. There's something to be said for a postnup, even though I didn't have one because we didn't have anything.
Yeah.
And now we just celebrated our 30th anniversary. So,
Congratulations.
Thank you. So yes, set the terms and conditions while everything is kind of chill where there's zero sales, right? Figure that out. Hire a lawyer if you have to. There's plenty of them out there. Certainly in New York, there's you can barely walk down the street and not bump into 500 lawyers. So get that done. Stick it in a desk drawer, figuratively speaking, somewhere. Don't look at it. Don't obsess over it. Just have some parameters, because partnerships are really, really tough to keep together. That's why the divorce rate is 70%. Same thing with businesses, right? It's tough. Make sure that you have complementary skill sets. Make sure that you kind of know what the terms of engagement were. What happened with myself and my partner was he kind of morphed into like a poor man's version of Mr. Inside and didn't really want to sell anymore. I still remember the day that I said, let's just switch roles. I will go out and do the selling and you can run the business inside. Oh no, I'm 100% responsible for the sales of this company. That was kind of his catchphrase. Well, get out and sell then, right? Because we'd hit a point where we were about $4 million worth of sales annually at the end of the 90s, but I could see the handwriting on the wall. I could see margins, compressing. Computer business was a tough business. I saw it, he didn't. And then finally, when the when that bubble burst, we had a leasing company as well. And, the proverbial shit hit the fan. We were not prepared. We just weren't prepared. And, it's just like, think about COVID as the ultimate black swan event. If you were in the travel business, one day everything was hunky-dory, and the next day you were done. You were toast.
Yeah.
Those are hard to prepare for. I get that. But you do need to have at least, you're not preparing for the worst case, a meteorite hits you in the head, that kind of thing, right? But you do have to have some rational understanding of what the risks are and what the downside to your business is. And one of those is, my spouse says she's on board, but when things get tough, I can tell you, even from my experience, my wife we had a few, pointed arguments, discussions, whatever it is you might want to call that, about why the business wasn't more successful that early on. Mm-hmm. But in my defense, I will tell you that it took at year 3, I was making more money than I was making from the job that I left.
And I
felt vindicated.
I think that's part of the value, though, in this whole conversation is, I can't remember the expression. It's something like it's going to take longer than you think it will, or whatever. Said much sexier the way I just said it.
Right.
But I think a lot of people, they start a business and they really expect to replicate their past job salary, like in the first month or the first 3 months. Mm-hmm. You made it happen by year 3, and year 3 is about what I typically hear from people. I had another guy who he's literally one of the world's leading dental cosmetic whatever. Mm-hmm. And he said in the dental industry, it's literally on average, it's about 10 years before someone becomes actually profitable. So to have that endurance, I think it's tough for many of us, especially in a day of social media where everyone, you're in business for 10 years, but you tell your overnight success story on social media of, it just happened. It just worked. So for better or worse, that's we're, I guess.
That's about setting expectations, right? So you look at that and say, okay, if I don't make a nickel for the next 2 years as I ramp this business up, how are we going to be? Mm-hmm. Am I going to be able to sleep at night? Is my wife or husband going to continue to support me? It's tough. So these are all questions that you should answer before you've spent a nickel on this business, right? Mm-hmm. Do all this stuff while it's, while it doesn't really cost you anything.
Yeah. It's great advice. Henry, this has been such a fun episode, man. I feel like I just gleaned, just me personally, I feel like I gleaned a lot of really great information and insight from you.
Good. I aim to please.
Tell my listeners, people who are listening right now, they're like, man, I gotta know who this guy is. I gotta meet this guy. I gotta talk to this guy. I gotta connect with this guy. And maybe I even need to get into this course that this guy is offering. What can my listeners do to both connect with you and learn more about you and what you're offering?
Yeah, that's easy. So my website is called Daas Knowledge, DAAS Knowledge. I also have DASS Knowledge because people misspell my name all the time and it just does a redirect. So Daas Knowledge, if you go there, I give away lots of stuff. I give away my book. If you click on the FQ link, you can scroll down the page. It'll take you to a landing page and you can download the book for free from BookBaby. Because the only one who makes money off of books is Jeff Bezos and he's already got enough. I just want people to read it. There are little quizzes on there, money mindset quiz. There's a bunch of giveaways, 10 things to ask when hiring a business coach, and 5 reasons small businesses fail. They're like long form PDFs, like 20, 30 page PDFs. So if you like to read, if you don't like to read, I don't have any videos. I'm sorry. I'm old school. I'm a boomer. Or you can go to henrydaas.com. which is kind of an amalgamation of like all my stuff, including the aforementioned screenplays and baseball cards and other stuff that I like to do, my golf trips. If you click on Get My Help when you come to my website, you can sign up for a free strategy session. What I give away for podcast listeners is if you go to podcast.dasknowledge.com and complete the survey, I will give you a month of free coaching, either on money or business or a little bit of both. Wow. Right? And that's only for people who listen to the zillions of podcasts that I do.
I love it. Well, Henry, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. It was such a joy and I so appreciate it. And I will be sure to make sure I put those links down in the episode description below.
Awesome. Yeah, it was great fun. Really enjoyed our chat.
Yeah, me too. Hey, for our listeners, if this is your first time listening, what the heck you waiting on? Click that subscribe button so you can keep getting good advice wherever you're at. And remember, just like I mentioned, I'm going to put those two websites, Daas Knowledge and henrydaas.com, down in the episode description below. I'm also going to put a link to Henry's social media, his LinkedIn, and also his Facebook page. Those will also be down in the episode description below. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It actually helps us out quite a bit. And of course, don't forget, we are on Patreon, patreon.com/good advice. If you want to buy myself or our next guest a cup of coffee, or if you want to get all sorts of premium content, you can do that. Just go to patreon.com/good advice. Hey, thanks for listening. So appreciate your support. We'll catch you later. See ya.